Hey guys, it's Chris here. So I just went out and shot some time-lapse sequences at a lake nearby. So what I'm going to do now is edit those sequences and show you my workflow for working with time-lapse and producing short time-lapse movies. There's a lot of steps in this. It's probably going to be a very long video, but let's just get cracking with it. So the first thing I did actually is transfer all my pictures to my storage drive. So that's already done. I didn't want to bore you guys how to do that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to edit in Lightroom. So let's just open Lightroom up. Okay, great. That was one of the last photos I edited. So what I'm going to do here is import a sequence of photographs. Now, I've not even looked at these pictures yet, so this is going to be literally as real as it gets. So let's just click import. Okay, so let's go to my book Duo, and I'm going to find the pictures that I want to edit. So I've already, as I said, uploaded these from my camera onto the hard drive. So this is the naming convention that I have. So for this sequence, I'm actually going to edit the RX100 time-lapse shots, I think. Let's take a little look in RAW. These files are a lot smaller. They're about 1/4 the size of my other camera, so it will probably be quicker to help you guys out. Don't want to wait too long. So let's just take a look at some of these pictures. See what I shot with this camera. Okay, so this is actually just a a shot of the camera doing the time-lapse, or more time-lapse inception here, timeception, but alright, change of plan then. We're just going to go to the RAW of the main camera here and see what we have. That's more like it. Lots of interesting shots here. So I'm going to give the software a bit of time to download these thumbnails. While I'm doing that, I'm just going to flick through some of these shots and see what I captured. So there's actually 2 or 3 time-lapse sequences here at different times. This one you're seeing here in the middle to bottom, this is towards the end of the sunset. The sun's already gone down past the horizon, which actually is often when you get the best shots, although the sunset tonight wasn't particularly inspiring or anything, but I think it's still going to be worth producing this time-lapse shot. Some things have a way of just looking great in motion, but not, great as an individual still. So as you can see, Lightroom's trying its best to generate these thumbnails. These are really big files. Okay. Some of these look very, very detailed. This is a nice shot. I can already tell this is going to look very cool. This part up here with these striped kind of colored clouds is really, really awesome. So I think we can get some nice motion out of that. So the deal with time-lapse, if you don't know, is you essentially take lots of pictures with the camera as still as possible, so on a tripod. And depending on the movement in the scene, you might want to go anywhere from a photograph every 1 second, all the way up to, maybe 5 seconds if it's an incredibly slow scene or you want the motion to take place over a long duration. I think the shots that I did here, about 200 photographs, like 2 or 3 seconds between each. Now, the way that time-lapse works is you put all these frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way across together, and it will make a moving image. So, assuming that we're working on a 24 frames per second movie file, we'll get 24 of these, will be 1 second of movie. So you need a lot of pictures. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import, going to find the beginning frame. By the looks of it, it's somewhere like here. This looks like a new shot in the timestamp. What I often do is actually take a photograph of my hand in front of the camera. So in this shot you'd see a hand to signify that this is a new frame. It just helps me browse all the pictures when you've got hundreds of shots like this. But let's just go ahead and import some of these pictures. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to scroll down until somewhere, I think this is actually, by the looks of it, this is continuing right through to the end. Fantastic. Oops, we're going to select this frame and find the first frame again, which is up here. Okay. Let's hold Shift, and then we can toggle this on and off. Oops, sorry, my bad. I can toggle all these together. Great, so now I've got all my pictures. These are all raw files, as we can see here, taken 4 hours ago. So let's click import and see what happens now. So Lightroom's actually very quick at importing these files, which is awesome. And now that's generated the thumbnails we can see. Now, this is a sunset photograph, sequence, which is actually probably one of the trickier time lapses to shoot. The reason being that, as you can see, this first photograph is a lot brighter. than what will eventually be the end photograph, which is a lot darker. So you see here, this is very dark. We come up to the first frame, it's very bright. And obviously this is because the sky is getting darker as the sun is setting behind these trees. So a trick that you can often do is, what I like to do is start the first exposure about 2 stops over in terms of what the light meter thinks is a good exposure. And the reason for that is you will get the most amount of range out of this sequence of shots. Now there are methods to automatically blend and change the amount of ISO and whatever things over the sequence of the shots, but that's something that I don't need to do. This camera is incredibly powerful. So a good tip here is probably to edit, what I try to do is edit the photograph in the middle frame. Then what we're going to do is move all these settings across to all of the pictures and then see how it looks. So this is something in the middle of the exposure range. So now I'm going to go to develop, and I'm just going to work on this sequence. So first thing I like to do is just bring up the shadows. This camera has unbelievable shadow recovery. So it's, as you can see here, I've recovered almost all of the shadows there, and the noise is still perfectly controlled. This is an incredibly high quality image here. So I've recovered the shadows, I've got some of the trees back. I like that a lot. I'm going to drop down the highlights a little bit. Now what's worth noticing is if I do something incredibly and crazy with this image in terms of these settings actually, the darker and brighter images in the sequence are probably going to look very odd. So I don't want to go too extreme actually on these edits. If it's just a standard, one shot still, you can pull these numbers around as you like, but when it's a sequence, you have to be a little bit more careful. So let's just push that up. Color temperature, I'm just going to look and see what we've got. I'm going to darken it, brighten it here. This is nice. I think this image is going to look more interesting with this is certainly more realistic here, but I'm just going to warm up the image a tad and still try and keep some blues and coolness in the image, so that's nice. Going to try pushing the exposure up and pulling back the highlights. We'll see how that works with all the other pictures. And what I like to do is apply a lot of contrast, but as you see now that I've added more contrast, the shadows that I recovered earlier are actually gone. So, but it's obviously this is still helping. You can still see some details here. Good, okay, it's a little bit too much. Nice, okay, let me just add a little bit of saturation here, not too much. Just want to see what can happen with these colors. This is nice over here, this is starting to look good. Okay, great. Let's apply some sharpening. Just going to hold Alt key here and drag and mess with my mask here so that the image doesn't get too noisy. What you'll often find is if I go crazy on the sharpness here without a mask, you'll see that you get a kind of haloing effect on, especially, not so much here, but especially over here. If you look here, you'll see that this is much brighter near this edge of this tree. If I turn it off, you'll see the difference. So it's not a particularly flattering effect. So applying this mask, we can control a little bit how much of the image is going to be modified by that sharpen. Okay, looking good. Going to enable the profile correction here for this camera, for this lens and camera. Okay, don't want a vignette for this. The vignette I would probably apply, in the movie software, so I don't want to constrain the image necessarily for this shot. Let's work a little bit on the colors now. This image doesn't have too much going for it actually, in terms of the colors. This sunset can be incredibly beautiful here, but this night it was actually quite subtle. But I'm going to just play with the saturation a bit. Now what you can do when my mouse is here, there's this fantastic button. If you click this, what this is doing now, if I just hold left click and drag up and down on that color, what you'll notice is it's affecting the color ranges that I clicked on, so and probably just very close to around it. So I can actually make this orange incredibly saturated here if I want. Okay, let's just unselect that now and zoom out. Yes, that looks a little bit more interesting. So we've got something there. I'm going to play with the luminance of it a little bit. So we're going to click on luminance and do the exact same thing. Click on this. Just want to see if I can brighten up that just orange a little bit there. So it'll kind of make it look not so saturated, but it will make it pop out in the image there. Very nice. I'm liking where that's going. Let's also adjust the blues a little bit here. So again, we're going to, but I'm actually going to adjust the hue of the blue. Just want to see if I can experiment with this, add a bit more life into this. It's gone incredibly crazy. Ooh, let's just zoom out. Yes, it's looking nice now. So I'm going to drop the purple back a bit. Let's just do manual saturation override here. Very nice. And let's play with the luminance of the blue, just see what we can do with this image. Oh, that's kind of interesting, darkening that down a bit. I like that a lot. Actually brings out some of the definition in the sky here, which I think is really just checking that that's not noise. That's actually just because this image is very high res there. Great. I think that's actually looking pretty interesting now. There's a lot of contrast in the image, which is to be expected because it's shot, you know, into the sunset. Okay. So now I'm just going to do some basic cropping editing here. So I'm going to use the crop tool. I'm just going to straighten this image out. Very nice. Drop that down a tad. So I'm planning to put this in a 2:35:1 ratio, you know, kind of anamorphic frame. So I imagine that there will be crop bars somewhere here and towards the bottom. So I actually want to just raise this up a tad, because I would imagine the bar coming down here and up here. Now in terms of the composition, what's ideal is to not have the middle of the frame here be the middle of the waterline, so playing with this a tad makes the image a little bit more dynamic. I do like the foreground here, although it is very dark, but we'll have to see how that translates across to all the images actually, because remember, this is one frame out of many. Okay, great. Just gonna pull back some of these a tad, because I'm a little bit worried that when I synchronize this, it's all gonna go to hell. Okay, looking good. So that's the very basic editing done to the mid frame there. So now I'm going to go back to my library view, and this is the frame that I edited. Sorry, on the left here you'll see the unedited and edited. So I just gave it some punch essentially for now. This is probably the first of maybe one or two more bunches of edits I'll actually be doing to this, but okay, great. So now I've got my picture. What I'm going to do is click on the frame that I actually edited, and I'm going to go to Develop Settings, Copy Settings, and I'm actually going to check all, because I think everything in here I want to actually move across, and click Copy. Now that that's copied and stored in memory, essentially, I can select every single picture, all of almost 200 frames, go to Develop Settings, and I can paste the settings into here. And what this will do now is this is moving all those settings that I copied across. As you see here, it's working across all the images here, which is really great. So let's look at the very brightest scene and what it looks like. Just checking that this isn't some crazy banding in the sky there. Just, yeah, Lightroom's obviously going to be a little bit slow here. No, it's not. It was just the image loading. That's great. So this is the very earliest frame, and we can see what the very darkest frame looks like with our changes. Oh yes, that's beautiful. I really like that. Nice work there with the gradient here. Looks pretty interesting. So it's actually already applied all of the settings. It's just taking a while to update all these thumbnails. As I said, these are incredibly high res. So now that I've roughly looked at the beginning frame here, and I'm kind of okay with that, and I've looked at the end frame, which I'm definitely happy with, I'm not as happy with the first frame, the early frame. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find one of the, probably the first, you know, second of shots, and I'm just going to edit this frame now. And I'm going to drop the highlights down here a tad. And I think that's already recovered pretty nicely. There's something I am going to do here as well, is I'm going to do some basic spot correction, because I did actually notice a little bit of dust on my lens, which is very common shooting at this f-stop. I'm f13 here, and I often don't keep my lenses as clean as they should be, but essentially if you notice here, right above my mouse and around my mouse here, there's a little dot, and this is not a bad dust spot at all, but I'm just going to use this tool up here, the spot removal, so I'm going to click on that, and it's going to find me a sample next to it. Now, there's obviously a pro and a con to this. Now, if this is just a standard still image, no problem at all. Do what we need. But remember that this is a sequence of moving images. And that sample will just get really confused and it'll sample different spots or the same spot, and then basically the image in motion will just look very odd. So I know that this image doesn't really change much at all, because the sky is not that busy. There's not many clouds or any volcanic plumes or anything crazy or cars going by or anything like that. So I'm kind of safe to do some of those small tweaks to the dust spots in this case. Ideally, you really want to make sure that your sensor and lens is as clean as possible from dust. And in this particular instance, it doesn't look too bad. I think this is lagging because I'm recording actually the footage, or it's writing thumbnails, but this is actually very, very slow to work with for me. But I'm just going to look around here. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I would often be hunting, especially for a still image, I'll be hunting down these dust spots. There's another one there. So actually, it's really not too bad at all, just 2 dust spots. Where were you? I can't remember. That one was pretty obvious, so I'm going to go hunting you down. There you are. Great, so we're going to just do the same thing again. Hit enter on the middle there, and it's found me a sample. I'm actually going to move this sample a little bit to the left because I don't want quite as much distance there, especially if a cloud appears or something. It might be a little bit better if it's closer. Good. So that looks very nice. Now what I'm going to do is also experiment with a gradient filter here. So what I want to do is see what happens if I bring out that foreground a little bit there. Remember that this is one of the darkest frames, so this is going to get a lot darker actually as it goes on. So I can actually exaggerate this foreground brightness a little bit here and know that it's going to get darker over time. Drop the contrast a tad on that. I'm going to push up the clarity just a tad on that. I actually like the detail and color in this image. This is actually, well, it's incredibly high res, but I actually like that now. That's got a little bit more brightness in the foreground. Very nice. I'm going to apply a different gradient now to just see if I can mess with the color temperature. Now what I've discovered over time actually is that adding gradient color temperatures can actually really help add some interest to your scene if it's not a particularly glorious sunset or something like that. You can technically do this with a real filter in front of the camera. In the old days they'd often do that with gradient color filters and things, but we're just going to see what we can do. Do you like the idea of warming that up just a tad? Great. Maybe just going to see about bringing up the shadows over the whole image just a tad. I said this is one of the brightest shots and we still can't really see the trees, so I'm just going to push that just a tad more up. And now that I've raised up the overall image, I'm just going to click here on the filter that I edited for the exposure and just drop that down to equalize that out. Very nice. That's starting to look a little bit better. Now this element in the picture here, this I'm actually on like a very small dam here, and there's a kind of spill off to the left. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply or experiment with applying a radial filter over this part of the image. So if I just drag here, it creates a radial filter. Now if I just zoom out a tad by holding Control here and just dragging, what I can do is I can kind of focus this on this radial filter on this particular element. I'm going to click Invert Mask, and you'll see why, because if I leave it by default, it will darken everything outside or brighten everything outside and so on. But if I invert the mask, this will actually just expose this element. So I'm going to bring up drop the contrast a little bit and just bring up the exposure, maybe 2/3 of a stop here. Bring up a little bit of clarity on that as well. And I'm going to feather it a little bit more because I want it to be much more of a natural. Now this image isn't moving actually, so I don't have to animate this or anything. The camera's staying, but the rest of the image is moving. Now what I don't want to do is get particularly into the sky, because if I move this into the sky, you'll actually see more of a jump up in exposure there. Just a tad more on that. Now if I zoom out, now what you notice there is because it's a very soft gradient on that, it hasn't really made the image false or anything. If I go back into it and really mess with these numbers a lot, you'll actually notice that there's, well, even then it's still kind of, yeah, it just looks a little bit fake with these edges, and I don't want to spend time cutting that out or anything. So I'm just going to drop it down back to under one stop. But what that has done is that's put the eye on that element a little bit better, and actually is quite an interesting part of the image, so it's worth bringing that out. So I'm actually pretty happy now with how this first shot looks. So what I'm going to do is go back to my library again and repeat the first step that I did. So I'm going to go onto the frame that I just edited, copy the settings, copy everything. Going to go to, oh, was I really editing that? Well, anyway, I'm just going to translate that to all the shots to see what it looks like. Develop settings, paste settings, and off it goes again, doing its thing. So usually it takes 2 or 3 edits. I'm on the second edit now to get the sequence feeling real good. It's definitely a little bit bright, but what's interesting is when I put these sequences together, this is actually about 8 or 9 seconds. If it's 200 shots, it's 24 frames a second, so you get 4 seconds for 100 photographs. So it's about 8 seconds of sequence. In the final video that I make, this will probably be about 6 seconds. And what I'll often do is chop the first 24 frames out and the final 24 frames out, depending on, I suppose, what's the most interesting shot. And often it's in the middle of the range. Oh, that's very, very nice when you see now, because we raised the exposure of this element is popping against the background, even though it's super dark all around it. And it doesn't look particularly false or anything, which is what we're going for. But I really like that moody, so I think I might even just, start the sequence from somewhere like here and end it. Maybe not there, maybe just somewhere over here or even lower. And so on and so forth. So just going to do a quick check again at the maybe 24 frames in. Liking that. Again, that banding that we see here is just the image compression in this preview because it's such a big file. Going to look in the middle. Yes, very nice. A little bit flat perhaps, but that's kind of intentional because that will allow me to do some final grading on my video depending on the kind of color and mood that I'm going for. So this isn't as stylized as I could go if I knew the direction of the final video in terms of the color, palettes and things like that. And you'll see what a difference there is between the shots. So there's that really interesting sky formation there. And checking the final frame. Absolutely fantastic. Kind of happy where that's going. So now that I have all my frames edited, I need to export them. Now what I tend to do is if I'm making even a 1080p video or whatever, I'll export these in 4K resolution. At least that's what I did for my previous project. But what I'm actually going to do now is export these all as 4K, as 6K, or around about 6K, or just at least more than 4K. And I think that way that will actually allow me to do more animation in the scene, the panning of the shot, and because essentially in post, even a 4K, as long as it's higher res, you can still zoom the image in essentially. In the final composite in Adobe Premiere. So I'm going to select all my shots here and I'm going to start the export process, and I'm going to put this, I'm not going to put it on my desktop actually, I'm going to use a folder perhaps. Where am I going to put these? Specific folder. Okay, so let's just put this, and I'm going to export these all to my RAID array here, which keeps them all nice and backed up. Time-lapse frames, that's right, I have to do it this way, so let's just make a new folder here called Lake Johnson. This is going to be Sunset 01. Okay, great, so now I have a folder, and it's pretty important to keep these organized, and you'll see why later. I'm going to leave the naming exactly how it is, because the way this works is the post-process in, the compositing of the frames in Adobe Premiere will allow you to do image sequences, and it will just take that number, and every one next it will just keep adding until it makes the final movie file. So I'm just going to check these settings now. let's play with this size a little bit. Let's just make these 6,000 pixels. I'm okay with that. No chance of it enlarging, but don't enlarge is worth flagging on the long edge. So 6,000 pixels this way, and 4K would obviously be the longest part of the screen. That would be about here. So we have plenty of buffer room later on. Okay, that looks good. Just checking these settings a little bit close because this is going to take a while. I'm actually going to export JPEGs here. There's absolutely no need, in my opinion, to export TIFFs because I'm going to be compositing a movie file from this, and then all the range is limited, so I can't push much, the image much more in post once it's been baked down. The good news is these are all raw files, and these are not being edited in terms of the original files here, so I can always come back and work on this if, for example, I put the movie in the final composite and it just doesn't feel right, or there's something very odd with the, a contrast or something like that. Looks good. So let's get these exporting. This is going to take a long time. I mean, potentially half an hour to an hour with this many 42 megapixel pictures being exported. So if you notice up the top here, it's exporting files. It's still preparing them. It hasn't even done one yet. So I will cut to the next part of the tutorial where these files have been all exported as JPEGs, and then we'll be stitching it together and making an animated movie. So what we're going to do now is open Adobe Premiere, and that will allow us to composite all these frames into a movie file. And thankfully Adobe make it nice and easy to do that. So let's click open on Adobe Premiere CC. There are lots of free software out there that do similar things, that merge frames to make a time-lapse sequence. So we're just going to quickly make a new project for this and call this Timelapse. I actually have some presets, but it's probably easier just to show you from scratch here. So this is where we import media to start here. So this is my default template. I actually have a big working screen on the other side, so I'll have to bring that across as I work on it. So let's go to import here, and we'll notice that it takes us to wherever we were before. So I'm going to go to Timelapse Frames, Lake Johnson, Sunset, and now selecting the first frame, what you'll notice at the bottom here is Image Sequence. So just to look at my mouse, Image Sequence here, and what this will do is it basically looks at these numbers and it will make a movie file out of all of these frames. Easy as that. So if I click open, it won't take long at all, and you notice that says 6 seconds and 16. So what we can do now is drag this picture into our frame. Oops, didn't want to do that. Let's just try and separate this for now. Okay, so we can drag this into our timeline here. And what this will do, if I drag across the picture here, is this will actually make a movie. So if we click play, now remember this is incredibly high-res 6K, so I'm actually going to have to drop this down to 1/8 of working size to get even a half decent playback speed here. Let's see what's going to happen. So this is very slow because this is a huge working file. And if we play this a few times, it should hopefully smooth out with a bit of luck, as it stores all the various frames into memory. Yes, that's going to look pretty cool when it's nice and smooth, so we'll just keep looping that. Remember that this is 1/8 resolution, so it's incredibly high res. And we're probably not going to see anything much smoother than that until I export the frames. It's just simply too much data there. But that's actually the image now, the sequence now put together, which is fantastic. So what I'm going to do is just export that, just so we can look at it. I'm just going to export that out to my desktop. Export media. Let's, I'm just actually going to do it in 1080p for now. But I'm going to do it in H.264 codec, which is the standard for web use. And I'm going to, actually let's do 4K, so YouTube 4K footage. Now it's actually going to put a crop on the side, just because of how I crop the image vertically. So now it's going to do it on the side horizontally. So, and just call this test timelapse. And doesn't need audio for now, so we're just going to click export. And this actually shouldn't take too long. 19 seconds, great. And then we actually have a time-lapse sequence, easy as that. So The benefit of bringing it in so high res, it just allows us to do a lot with it later on. Now, if you have a slow PC or you really want to see it run in real time, there's no reason at all why it has to be, exported in 6K. You can export it 1080p if that's going to be your final working resolution. So no need to do that at all. Now this is actually exporting at 29.97 frames, so 30 frames a second. Now what I actually should have shown you, and I'll just show this briefly. Here we have our sequence file. What you can do is you can click modify. I think we have to do it from our base here. Oh, wrong one. So if we go to modify, you'll see interpret footage. Now this actually allows you, by default, it will usually run at 30 frames per second, but you can say 23.976, which is, or 24 or whatever, which is your standard frame rate for cinematic, and that will just obviously stretch the sequence a little bit here in terms of the time. But for this video, it's absolutely fine. I think I'm uploading at 30 frames, so it should be okay. Anyhow, we've now got a file on our desktop. We're going to run this, and we should see the movie sequence playing very smoothly. Nice, that's very nice. Now what I might want to do, we'll just repeat that a few times just to look through it again. But what I might want to do is speed that up just a tad in post. So I would go to the speed settings, and I'll show you briefly how to do that. What I do also like is see this cloud here, but where my mouse is. This is really interesting, so I might zoom in or out to that in post. But that is a nice looking sequence, and this is in 4K resolution, very high res. If I wanted to speed it up, I would go back to Premiere here and click on my frame, and I would go to speed/duration. So here it's going to be by %. So if I set it to 150% speed, this time will probably drop down to about here or something like that. There it goes, great. Now, so this is actually sped up. And then if I play this, well, again, it's going to play very slow because of the resolution size, but that's how you speed up the image essentially, nice and easily. So that is it. We've made a time-lapse movie. We can now go into our main project and put that clip in and work from it. That's how I like to work. I'll make lots of working files, lots of separate movies, and then bring all the clips together and make a final sequence and then animate it and add the various black bar cropping depending on the project I'm working on and all that type, and potentially color grading. This isn't stylized at all. This is pretty neutral. It's pretty saturated, a little bit more saturated than real life, but it's not being graded by any sense. What I mean by that is the shadows aren't blue, and I haven't added color to the highlights and things, so it's certainly gradable at this point, which is probably the best way to go about it, at least if you're trying to do a big project and you have lots of time-lapse sequences. So there we have it. That's how you create a time-lapse sequence. Obviously this didn't talk about photography and how to take the shots and all the exposure settings and things, but once you got your frames, this is how easy it is to spit out a 6-second sequence. And overall it took about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, mostly because of the export process of the images. But if you have lower res images like a 20 megapixel camera and you're exporting, say, 1080p or 2K or 3K or whatever exports, it's going to be a lot quicker too. It took its time because it's 6K resolution, which is a pro and a con, I suppose, for the extra resolution. So there we are, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.